It is my pleasure to introduce Sharyll Burroughs, an amazing artist and thinker.
Is that what I am? Okay.
Sharyll Burroughs is a multidisciplinary artist and dialogue facilitator who is interested in transcending conventional beliefs about what identity means. She utilizes art, Buddhism, and the practice of self-inquiry to explore identity beyond racial, cultural, and societal definitions, an unorthodox approach which cultivates dialogues embodying our common humanity. She attended the Santa Monica College of Design Art and Architecture, a school founded by MacArthur Genius Fellow Joan Abrahamson. Her work has been featured in solo and group exhibitions in Los Angeles, California, and in Portland, Oregon. And it is with a lot of pleasure and enthusiasm that I welcome Sharyll.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that you've all come out on this sort of typical Portland evening. My son's visiting me from Brooklyn, so I have Brooklyn on the mind, so it's I'll start again. I'm very happy that you're all here, and I'm really thrilled that to be part of this Artist Talk series that is happening here at the museum. I would like to just tell you a little bit about my philosophy about art. I believe that art is life and life is art. I don't separate the two. I do my best to live my life as art. I don't compartmentalize it. That we are all here together, gathered in this room with a common intention, I think is a very powerful form of art. Art gives us insight into the world and our place within it, but more importantly, it helps us to ask different questions about what it means to be human. And because it doesn't judge, it creates a spaciousness in which we can feel our emotions, talk about things that are meaningful, as well as confess what shames us. The human condition is of great interest to me. My practice as an artist and a thinker, as Jaleesa said, is to contemplate the concept of identity. What forms a self? What is it that influences the ways in which we define ourselves and our beliefs about who we are? I'm going to speak on this wonderful work of art here in a short while, but first I'm going to give you some context and background. We'll talk about the piece, then we're going to take a detour, actually a couple of detours, come back around to the work, and then I'll finish up, and I am hoping that we have plenty of time for questions and answers when I am finished. We're going to be looking at identity through the lens of scarification. And to stay within the context of Mr. Thomas's work, the African American experience, I'm going to be showing you some images from Africa. What is the definition of human being? Cultures all over the world practice scarification, but for, like I said, the purposes of this talk, we're just going to stay within the context of Africa. There are different methods and versions of scarification, but what you are seeing are patterns that were cut on the surface of the skin with a sharp instrument. When the cuts heal, they leave raised welts. These patterns on the body are quite beautiful. I think they are art forms in and of themselves, but more importantly, they communicate an individual's story within a tribe or a culture. Scarification transmits complex messages about identities such as rank, family lineage, beauty, or strength. Some tribes believed in the presence of spirits, good and evil. Facial scarring was used to make a person less desirable to the spirit of death. The scarification of women could indicate signs of fertility and a willingness to bear children, as well as celebrate femininity within a society. Anyone unwilling to participate in scarification were generally not included in group activities. Group members lacking characteristics consistent of the group were not considered in full standing, with no capacity for meaningful behavior such as commanding or greeting. Scarification served as an identity card on the surface of the body, a very important commodity. It transformed members into normal states which were recognized and accepted. So in other words, people conformed to the expectations of a cultural system, which dictated knowledge about where they fit. And I think this is a little inflexible in terms of thinking about identity just in general, because it is solely based on the values of the collective, rather than an individuated connection to one's self. What is the definition of human being? So I'm just going to layer this on top of what I just shared with you. We're in the United States. This is Gordon. I'm sure this photograph is familiar to many of you. The photo is also known as Whipped Peter. It now resides in the permanent collection of the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, D.C. Gordon was enslaved, the property of John Lyon, who owned a 3,000-acre plantation in Louisiana. In 1863, during the Civil War, Gordon escaped, running for 10 days until he reached the Union's 47th Massachusetts Infantry, which was camped outside Baton Rouge. This photo was taken during a medical examination before Gordon enlisted in the colored 2nd Louisiana Infantry Regiment. And then it was given to abolitionists to distribute throughout the United States as well as internationally to show the abuses of slavery. I would like to read something that Gordon said in his own words. Overseer Carrier whipped me. I was 2 months in bed from the whipping. The master was not present. My master come after I was whipped. He discharged the overseer. I don't remember the whipping. In the 2 months, my sense began to come. I was sort of crazy. I tried to shoot everybody. They said so. I did not know. I did not know that I had attempted to shoot everyone. They told me so. I burned up all my clothes, but I don't remember that. They told me I tried to shoot my wife. I never was this way before. End quote. So on a positive note, Gordon remained within his regiment and was promoted to sergeant, but nothing else is known about him, unfortunately. So what does this pattern of scarification communicate about Gordon's identity? Well, that his black body was a commodity to be exploited for the financial gain of the white majority power structure. His life was not his own, and dehumanization was the norm. So we have a system of oppression and a system of capitalism that are not mutually exclusive. They're basically one and the same. And they're joined together in a very toxic communion. All that was valued was the black body and how that body's work translated into revenue. So an enslaved person's identity was assigned by their owner, he or she, and there were few opportunities to cultivate a life of autonomy and authenticity. So the trauma of slavery and its legacy, sharecropping, lynching, inequality, racial profiling, and police brutality, is embodied in the DNA of the African American experience, the present day African American experience. And it's a psychological and spiritual scarring that has defined an entire culture. What is the definition of human being? Another layer, I'm going to be doing this a lot tonight, another layer. Branded Head by Mr. Hank Willis Thomas, and magnificent black and white photograph of a beautiful bald black head featuring a horrifying scarification. to say that the African American male experience in this country is actually not describable. So to say that they are marginalized is an understatement. This is a quote from the author and activist James Baldwin. If you're born into that situation, the nature of the trap is you're not even knowing it, acquiescing. You've been taught that you're inferior, so you act as though you're inferior, and on the level that is very difficult to get at, you really believe it. And of course, all the things you do to prove you're not inferior only really prove you are. They boomerang. You're playing the game according to someone else's rules. And you can't win the game until you can step out of it and understand that this particular game, after all, is not worth playing. Once people know what they know, they make the unconscious assumption that they were born knowing what they know, instead of understanding that they had to learn everything they know. So he's saying that this external society projects a lot of things onto us. And because we don't have anything to contradict these stories, they become inhabited and embodied as truth within our bodies. So it's like a fish in a fishbowl. It's a cliche example I'm going to give you, but little fish is in water, the water's in the bowl, the little fish is swimming, but it doesn't know it's in water, and it doesn't know that it's in the bowl. So this is how we kind of walk through life. We're just sort of accepting whatever is handed to us and then taking it and making it our own, when that is not necessarily a wise or smart thing to do. So excelling at sports, playing for a professional sports team, has long been viewed within the African American culture as one of the few opportunities to make one's way out of poverty. We live in a capitalist system. I believe that money is perceived as a normalizer, not an equalizer, but a normalizer. It transforms citizens into normal states recognized and accepted by other citizens. So how might this impact identity and how identity is formed? So we're going to take a look at the NFL. I don't know anything about football. All I know is what that beautiful person over there, my son, told me. He listened to all my stupid questions and helped me sort of figure out how to fit it into what this presentation is. The NFL, from what he says, is an extremely dysfunctional organization. Not only are they dysfunctional, they do not want to look at their dysfunction. Contrary, the NBA understands that it has issues, but they are actively trying to address these issues as best they can. But the NFL doesn't mind being dysfunctional, so we're just going to go with the NFL. There are 92 teams in the league, only 2 of which are owned by persons of color. Neither are African American. However, in 2018, 70% of NFL players were black. Yes, they're paid a lot of money, but they have no agency or power to control their experience. So a recent example is Colin Kaepernick. He knelt to protest racism and police brutality, and the NFL blacklisted him. So players are expected to conform to and represent the league, and that's it. So for all intents and purposes, the NFL is operating as a modern-day plantation. And they don't seem to mind. Black bodies are commodities exploited by the white majority power structure for financial gain. So we have a system of oppression that dehumanizes, just as I described in Gordon's case. And this is a reliving of history. It's like it's mirroring history. So however, conversely, and I am a contrarian, so I always try to flip it and see what's underneath. The NFL is an exclusive club. Membership normalizes an athlete's societal status so that their identity is defined as being not only somebody, but in some cases, gods to be worshipped. So the stigma of blackness is redefined as something more valuable. And the redefinition, by default, reflects upon the African American culture as in one of us, one of our own, has made it. Next layer, Nike, a system of capitalism. A Nike deal is another exclusive club. It boosts an athlete's status and income exponentially. The Nike brand was embodied into the African American culture in 1985 when Michael Jordan signed a deal with Nike to create the Air Jordan sneaker brand. But this set a precedent because it defined blackness as agency and autonomy, because he had total control over his brand and his identity. And this blueprint continues. Any athlete, not just African Americans, but any athlete that signs with Nike has control over their brand, what they communicate about their identity. And we, the consumer, purchase it and inhabit it. We inhabit whatever their identity is. That's sort of the point. And there are lots of people purposely wanting to do this. So I find this to be extremely interesting. It's identity as paradox. That's the way I'm thinking about it. Because when people conform to the expectations of a cultural and societal system, it's a type of programming. You know, we're inundated with lots of information about who we're supposed to be, where we're supposed to go, what we're supposed to do when we get there. We should be wearing a blue dress instead of a red dress. You know, so all of that information is absorbed, and it forms a set of beliefs within us, which become the truth. It's embodied knowledge. So the Nike brand is a valued commodity, not only within the African American community, but also just in society at large. So the people who use the swoosh, they use it as an identity card. It's an identity card that's on the body. And wherever they go, it makes this announcement. Here I am. And that's a language that's understood by other people. It's a recognition. Here I am. And you're with me and I'm with you. So they are normalized, recognized, and know where they fit. You know, if I wear this, I'll be accepted. So we have two exclusive clubs. The NFL, a system of oppression, exploiting black bodies, and Nike, a system of capitalism, enabling black bodies to sell themselves. I think that's a really interesting irony. So we have oppression and capitalism joined together in a very messy, sticky, awful, contradictory form of communion. What happens to a player when they are no longer a viable commodity? It happens all the time. People age out, they get injured, they kneel. Devin tells me that an NFL career only lasts 3 years, and that's not very long at all. So it comes as no surprise that they are abandoned, and there are huge losses: money, attention, a sense of belonging. But more tragically, there is a loss of identity. They were football, and they are no longer. So there's this huge void, and there's nothing to fill it with. So they're left with a psyche that is scarred, a scarification defining them as what they are not. Now they are nothing. Unfortunately, there is no awareness of an authentic self that is defined by more than football. What is the definition of human being? Another layer. We're going to take a detour. We're in Texas now. Talk about cultural DNA. Texas high school football is the air that Texans breathe. Nothing else exists. Nothing. Every Friday night during football season, millions of eyeballs are either watching games in person or on television or their devices or listening on the radio, whatever all it is. There was a famous book called Friday Night Lights that was written about this culture, and then it was turned into a television series. So Texas is swimming in money, we all know that. Much of it's spent on high school football, especially at the varsity level. Teams compete in state-of-the-art stadiums that rival anything that NFL players play in. Some of them seat 19,000 people. Some of the teams are put on chartered jets, travel to games on chartered jets, and then there are police escorts waiting for them when they get there to take them to their destination. So not only is there great privilege, the other side of that is that racism hasn't gone anywhere in Texas. Nowhere. So not only is there this kind of conundrum of, we have all this privilege over here, there are still lots of black people that are being hurt for no reason. So anyway, but all things being equal, thousands of boys are indoctrinated into this system. Some of the teams look like this, or like this. More look like this. So they're high school kids, and they're not paid. So they are white bodies exploited as commodities for the financial gain of the white majority power structure. But here's the wrinkle. Since whiteness in and of itself constitutes the definition of white privilege, can Texas high school football, the system, be defined as a system of oppression? So layer Nike on top of that. Nike is throwing staggering amounts of money into high school football. Staggering amounts of money. Each year, 162 soon-to-be seniors from across the country participate in an invitation-only football skills and training event called The Opening, which is held in Beaverton. In conjunction with that, 11 or 12 quarterbacks from the 162 vie for a spot in the Elite 11, a feeder, I guess, into the NCAA or the NFL. Nike covers airfare, lodging, and food for the 4-day event. One player said he received 10 different types of compression gear, 3 pairs of cleats, shorts, sweats, gloves, casual wear, and jackets. Not jackets. So not only did he participate in this exclusive event, he had all this stuff that he was going to put on his frame, emblazing a scarification saying, "I am somebody." He went home as somebody. I mean, he left as somebody because he's on a football team, but he really came back as somebody. So he was essentially assigning himself an identity. So similarly to what I spoke about with an NFL player who's no longer viable, what happens to athletes, high school athletes who don't make the cut to the NCAA or the NFL, especially when they're from some teeny little podunk town who rallies to make sure that their local team has a spot at glory. Bake sales, raffles, car washes, you know, the whole town invests its identity in this team. This is an excerpt from Friday Night Lights. For a lot of these players, they have sort of a glazed look in their eyes saying, what happened? What happened to the crowds? What happened to the attention? Because no one is more lonely and isolated than a former player who goes back to the locker room. There's a pat on the back and the coach says, "Hey man, it's great to see you." But then nobody cares. Nobody cares. They get shell-shocked. Well, they're shell-shocked because they no longer know who they are. And again, all of their identity was invested in being football. So there's a scarification of the psyche. But to be scarred at 17, I think is unconscionable because their life hasn't even begun. and it's over. And there's no support to try to help them understand that their footballness was just a teeny tiny component of their humanity. It's a teeny tiny component. But I don't think many conversations happen very often. What is the definition of human being? Another layer. We're in modern-day Africa, specifically Burkina Faso, a tiny country on the west coast of Africa. Today, the art of scarification has changed, primarily due to fears of HIV/AIDS transmission, as well as a migration of populations from rural areas into towns and cities. I would like to share what a few people have to say about scarification in their own words. We are not like others. In the past, when you had a smooth face, you were rejected. I used to like my scars. They were beautiful. We used to brag about them. Now in the city, it is definitely out of fashion. You are called names like torn face, and it hurts. Children no longer want to have it done. In the village, it was acceptable, but here it's embarrassing. If we could remove them, we would, because one is so different from others. I was a kid, but I still remember the wounds on me. When you didn't have them, your friends would laugh at you and put you aside. It was a way of recognition. I wear my identity on my face. This is the reason why people did it, to recognize one another. Now this is over. We can no more be recognized. So we have 3 identities that were obliterated in a millisecond. They went from, through no fault of their own, being accepted and recognized to being pariahs. That's a big gap. That's a big chasm. And I think it's a very poignant example of what I often think about, that culture is great until it's not. Everything's groovy as long as you fall in line with what is expected. But the second it decides to change, it does so, and if you can't keep up, oh well. In the late words of the late author and philosopher Terence McKenna, how many times have your sexual desires, career aspirations, financial dealings, and aesthetic inclinations been squashed, twisted, rejected, and minimized by cultural values? Culture is for the convenience of culture, not you or I. Societies are for the convenience of societies, not you or I. In my opinion, cultures place so much emphasis on the external manifestations of our humanity rather than developing a relationship with and to, belonging to oneself. We're conditioned to push everything outwards instead of looking inward. Here are a few examples of what 21st century scarification and identity look in some parts of Africa. Uganda, Senegal, this is the 2018 women's national basketball team, and Kenya. Gordon has joined us again. I would like to just say a little bit about history and identity. I think that history is great for reference. You know, we can look back and make sure we don't keep making the same mistakes in the future that hurt people under a certain circumstance, you know, a long time ago, or to rectify past wrongs. I recently listened to an interview with a spiritual teacher named Neelam, and she had some very fascinating things to say about history. She said, when the past arises, we're sometimes triggered. The past feels like it's happening in the present moment. So, you know, we see Gordon's photo, and we react. How can we not react? So there's this rush of momentum, this rush of emotions. And the feelings are very sticky. Guilt, shame, rage. That's what I feel when I see that photo, rage. And our nervous system is switched on because we're feeling these emotions so intensely. So not only is it switched on, it locks that momentum in place. So every time we feel this, it's recharging history. And we are reliving history at the same time. So when this happens a lot, we become familiar with it, and we become defined by it. So for instance, when Michael Brown was shot by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, I think in 2014, the past was recharged and relived. When Colin knelt on the field and then was blacklisted by the NFL, the past was recharged and then relived. So because it feels so present and it feels like it's in the moment, we get tangled up in it, and it feels impossible to sort of find our way out of it. But this is what caught my attention. She said, what makes the past so compelling is the repetition. The repetition keeps the past alive. If we continue to experience history this way, as something that defines us, there isn't any room to consider new possibilities that lead to positive transformation and healing. Because we're stuck. And it's a kind of a vicious cycle. So I think Branded Head really reflects, really reflects this. How is this any different than, hopefully I can go backward, that? They're intertwined because it's taking on an identity. This was forced on him. The Nike emblem isn't necessarily forced on us, but people feel compelled to inhabit it because they feel that's what they're supposed to do. And if they don't, they'll be left out. So in thinking about how this impacts all of us, it's embodying identities and brands that, again, really don't belong to us. It's one step forward and 100 steps back. Every time a black man is killed by a white police officer, it's 100 steps back. But it keeps happening again and again and again and again. I'm leaving Gordon up for a second. I just would like to have a little teeny chat about how I feel about this photo. This photo was taken for a purpose, and the abolitionists used it for good reason, to try to end the abuses of slavery. However, this is how he is out there in the world. You can go on Google. If you type in whipped Peter, or you type in Gordon and whipped Peter, this is what comes up. Now, I'm sure the photo did, some good. Maybe a plantation owner had a come to Jesus moment and said, I'm going to free all my slaves just from seeing the photo. I don't know. But this photo was taken the same day. It's not a great resolution, but you can see him. And I'll tell you what I see. I see intelligence. I see courage. I see spirit. Something is coming through him. It's a tangible something is coming through him. He's a human being. That other picture is not a human being. It's a circumstance. So I would just like to invite all of us to find another word for slave. That was a circumstance. It wasn't who they were. And it's part of the lexicon, and I don't know how we're going to get rid of it, but it describes millions of people who experience the unimaginable. And it reduces their humanity to continue calling them a slave. So I don't know what could replace it. I am open to any suggestions, but if we could all just kind of keep that floating in our mind every time we hear that word or every time we read it or whatever, how else could they be described, and how can we celebrate them? People are so stuck in the actuality of slavery, the I don't know how many years, I'm terrible with all of that, but I know that the New York Times recently did a big magazine. I was infuriated. Because it's not celebrating these people who went through this horrible experience for our benefit. We haven't learned anything from what they went through. And I want to try to find a way to celebrate them and keep them lifted, as opposed to redefining them as this thing. So anyway, I'm done. My rant is over. Identity is absurdly complex. I hope I have been able to map that out for you this evening. Human and identity are intractably bound together. Apparently, one does not exist without the other. We're all human, we're African American, we're Irish, we're Catholic. I'd like to know who made that rule. Why can't they exist without one another? It doesn't make sense to me. So, what is the definition of human being? What is the definition of human being? I don't really know anymore. And in my opinion, I think these labels have long outlasted their welcome. I think it's time for them to go away because it's a flawed language. Whiteness, blackness, Catholicness, our fears, assumptions, delusions, illusions. I'm curious about who we are without them. What happens when we drop all of that? What's left? And the what's left is where the exciting, meaningful dialogue can begin. Because it's not about the constructs, and it's not about the frame, and it's not about all of this out here. Who are we innately? What is the essence of our humanity, and why is it we cannot talk about that? That's what's important to me. So is all of this that's been constructed, is it a constriction of our humanness? I think that's a very important question. You know, is blackness a constriction of humanness? Is whiteness a constriction of humanness? I don't know, but it's worth a conversation because we can rethink what human means. We can make it whatever we want as long as if it's a version that represents the truth of who we are as opposed to what's been projected onto us. So it's a necessary conversation. It's not going to be an easy conversation. In fact, it'll probably be a horrendous conversation. But we have to have it. So I would like to share one more thing from James Baldwin. We are not obliged to accept the world's definitions. We have to make our own definitions and begin to rule the world that way, because kids, white and black, cannot use what they have been given. It's a very mysterious endeavor, isn't it? And the key is love. End quote. So humans are not just one thing. We need a new language with values and accepts a whole multidimensional person. I believe that an individual who operates from an interior landscape is no longer enslaved because they're not taking their cues from what's out here. It's not about external society. To quote Terence McKenna one last time, when you turn your eyes inward, you discover your birthright. End quote. So I believe that it is time to dwell within the deepest regions of who we really are and then live that as an unwavering truth. It's going to be different for all of us, but this is what I believe will save our humanity. I began this talk by stating that art helps us to understand the human condition. In closing, I would like to say that I am very grateful for the extraordinary work of Hank Willis Thomas, because his work keeps me conscious. It helps me remain conscious. It's a Zen whack. It strikes us across our psyche to refocus our attention on not only how broken our society is, but that we have to wake up to the travesties of inequality, injustice, and divisiveness. It's time to wake up in this 19th year of the 21st century as tribes, clans, factions, governments, corporations, institutions, congregations, and families continue to diminish and dehumanize one another because of who they are and who they are not. It's time to do better. It's time to be better. So I wonder what emancipation would look like. Imagine a world whose standard operating system is benevolence, hope, and compassion, where boundaries dissolve. And it's no longer about us and them, but about we. What would that look like? And I will leave that to you to contemplate. Art is life, life is art. Thank you very, very, very much. Any questions, comments? Yes. What's your name? Josie. Josie. Hi, Josie.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm teary. I don't know why.
Oh.
I came here and I got exactly what I hoped for. And thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome.
One of the things that I'm sort of obsessed with right now is that what I see sometimes in conversation about identity has to do with suffering, historical suffering, based on whatever the identity is or whatever the circumstance is. And I wonder if that isn't part of the challenge that we face, is that I feel, I was raised Catholic, so this might explain some of it, that suffering is just suffering, that there isn't a hierarchy of suffering. But as human beings, we tend to want to put everything in a hierarchy. And then we get into this competition about, well, my suffering is worse than yours. Or I have friends say, well, at least you're not in such and such a place having this or that happen to you. And I have a daughter who has been homeless at times for years at a time because she suffers from alcoholism. And it's terrible suffering. But in the hierarchy of suffering, then, where is that place? Because, of course, there's all this blame and guilt. So if you get involved in these hierarchies of suffering, it seems like that just adds to the division of things. And, of course, it's all tied up in injustice and the terrible things that human beings do to each other. But I'm just kind of curious what you think about that. Anything, if you do, if you think about it.
Well, I know a little bit about Buddhism, so the whole sort of philosophy of Buddhism is that
yes,
there is suffering.
Yes.
That's it.
Yeah.
And it's not about changing what's out here, it's about changing your relationship with the suffering.
Right.
And when you change that relationship with the suffering, it doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect, it doesn't mean everything's going to be wonderful, but you're not, as I mentioned in my talk, enslaved by it. Yeah. So you know that in this moment, and also we're only supposed to be living moment to moment, we're not supposed to be projecting forward, we're not supposed to be projecting backward, we're supposed to be in the moment right now. So whatever's happening right now is all that is relevant and all that's important. Right. But because people are pushing all their stuff everywhere, and then literally we are being pushed around by a bunch of stuff, our own stuff, other people's stuff. it's really hard to manage. So it takes a practice to think of the world not as something that is against you, but as something where you can learn about yourself. So something happens to you, so it's not what happens to you, it's what you do with it. And that's a lot of work that many people don't want to do because they want somebody else to fix it.
Right.
They want somebody to fix their suffering, when in fact you can't address other people's suffering until you address your own.
Right.
Because all you're going to be doing is projecting all your stuff onto them, expecting them to absorb it, and then everything's great because now you're simpatico. Whereas before, this person wasn't full of what you were, but this is what people do with one another. They just want other people to fix it. And there's also this concept of looking to other people for the meaning of who we are. Like we get our cues about whether we're okay or are we good enough. It starts with our parents, you know, and that's just how we're conditioned. But there is a conditioning where we do look to other people to be the validator and help us understand our own worth, when in fact we should be the ones deciding what our worth is. So it's very difficult. And again, it's sort of like what I said about the fishbowl. You know, we're in this and people don't realize that they have other options. They don't know that they can change their lives because they're looking to other people to fix it. So I don't know if that answered your question.
No, it's great.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anybody else?
I think for me, it's easy to understand one way or the other. Like either you are self-sufficient and you can project and make your own identity, and I can also understand people that are so worried about others projecting their identity so they just instantly conform. But the hard part is when the two simultaneously like are coexisting together, and that for me being a black child living in New Orleans and going to school and not wanting to wear Nikes in the 80s, you know, and watching people get jumped for their sneakers because of that. And then the two coming together at that turning point where that, seeing that line of demarcation in the black youth community as to what you have out on the outside dictates how we treat you. How does one coincide with the other and like trying to live in that and telling young people that it's okay, you don't look like the kids on social media, like you are still good, and then helping them to build that sense of self because they don't have the right building blocks within themselves at that time. Just how do you help somebody that is suffering in so many different forms of identity in this day and age to be able to stick with that it's going to get better and they're going to form that later, and to teach them that their 60-year-old self is not going to be worried about their, say, 13, 14, 15-year-old self?
I don't really have an answer, but I would like to ask you a question. Because what you're actually asking is, how can you help other people not suffer? Is that sort of the gist of?
It's just knowing what that feels like when, just being a kid at the time, knowing like instantly the next day everybody's got like Nike head to toe, including the sneakers, and then they're cool, and all the other kids that weren't are not. And have you know, you're not resilient at that age, and to
well, that's
really
an interesting. That's a great word, resilient, and that's a whole talk by itself, because I don't understand why some people have resilience and others don't. Some people just don't have it. They just don't have it. And there are also other people who can't. And I'm really trying not to make a broad sort of big brushstroke. I'm really not trying to generalize people, because obviously there's billions of people in the world and everybody's got their own story and their own thing. But the truth is, you can't help them. The only thing you can do is address your own suffering. So whatever way you want to help another person, whatever way you want to direct another person, do you do that with yourself?
Oh, are you asking me?
Yeah.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Well, I mean, I was that kid, but I was the kid.
Now. So, this idea of whatever you want for another person,
yeah,
flip it, pivot it back towards you, literally. So whatever it is that you want to accomplish for that person, flip it and bring it back towards you, and really ask yourself at a very deep level, are you addressing your own suffering? It may not be like within the context of a Nike thing or looking like everybody else or all of that, but there's some version of something, because whenever we want to really be of service for other people, often it's kind of,
well, you can't pour from an empty cup.
You can't, but you also have to understand that there needs to be, I'm not saying this to you personally, but there needs to be some recognition, awareness, inhabitation of what kind of person, what kind of human being do you want to be? Mm-hmm. And then all you can do is be that to the best of your ability. And then by default, it's going to impact other people, because other people are going to see your autonomy, they're going to see your authenticity, they're going to see you not reacting to things when they come, everybody else is going crazy and you're sitting here just kind of like with a lot of calm and thoughtfulness, and I will guarantee you, some people will pay attention.
Yeah, and for me, that's not a problem. But
you can't flip it the other way, because you can't help them. Even if you wanted to and they were willing, it doesn't mean that they're going to accept your help, because they're still caught in what they think they're supposed to be doing. And this is addictive stuff. And this society is set up as a competition.
Yeah.
It's survival of the fittest.
And it's easier to have that wherewithal with another adult, but when you're dealing with children, or you're mentoring, or I'm not a parent, but I would assume even as parents, like, how do you instill these values and sense of identity into someone that is living in a whole different sort of sub-society of ourselves being adults?
I'm not a big believer in talking. I'm a big believer in being. You just be. You are who you are. That's the most powerful form of political activism anybody can do, is to just be themselves, because it is dangerous to be yourself, because you're going to have all these people running at you telling you, why are you doing that? Because it's making me uncomfortable, and I don't recognize you, I don't see you, you're not fitting in my group, you're not, it's a language that people don't understand, why you're not joining their version of what they think is the way to be. So I understand your question, and I know that it's really difficult to watch kids suffering, but there's always going to be an opportunity for them to be able to sort of see what's really going on. I really believe that there's some ability for kids to understand what's the truth and what isn't the truth. And the difficult part is not realizing that it's the truth. The difficult part is not losing that, because it's so intense. The peer pressure is so intense, and it's very hard to resist it, because you don't want to be shunned. Just like the gentleman said, everybody did it, but your friends would laugh at you if you didn't have scars on your face, and it's really, really difficult. So all I can just say is, I think it's really important to just be solid in who you are. And you'd be surprised how that sort of energetically affects other people. They don't know, it's not like a conscious thing. They just know that like there's something I like about what's going over here, and then maybe they'll want to take the extra step to say, oh, what are you interested in? What are you doing? So that's when you do the work. But when you try to sort of just offer it to them, it's just going to bounce off, and it's not going to, because they're listening to their friends and they're watching television and they're, I mean, it's kind of a lost battle. So I don't know if that answered your question, but you just have to allow them to go through what they need to go through, and some of them make it and some of them don't. But the ones that make it, I mean, that's cause for celebration. Yeah. Anybody?
Hi. I actually just kind of wanted to piggyback off of that a little bit. In terms of, because
this is my son, everybody.
yeah, sorry, I'm a little biased. But I've basically lived this system. This is what I grew up in. This is how I was raised. And I think if you're looking for something a little more concrete, I do think there is ways that you can, for kids especially, you can help them. Teach them to question everything. Literally, question everything. Ask why. Why is it that we're, this is supposedly cool and we're supposed to be doing this? Why is it that, I have to act a certain way in order to maintain some standard to please you? Why is super important. I think if you can teach them to think for themselves, and it's hard, don't get me wrong, you gotta kind of have that spark in you. I think you gotta hunger, I guess, for knowledge. But if you can teach them to ask the important questions, I think that's how you actually get somewhere. And that's just my 2 cents on that.
Yes?
Hi.
Hi, Jane.
Hi. I'm going to try and put this question into words, but it kind of came about when you were saying, kind of when the whole identity thing falls away, there's this, and we experience who we are, and we can be in the world as we are. What I'm trying to ask is, at that point where the identity falls away and we can see sort of the push and pull of how identity works and the pressures in our lives, but then we can actually go into the space of who we are and be in relation to people or who they are. It just seems like so much work to drop all that identity. Can one begin being who one is and be in relation to everybody else and discover what that benefit might be at the same time that these whole identity things are going on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a solid, absolute idea of what that even means. It's that kind of evolved out of my own practice in never fitting in anywhere. Not my family, not school, not friends. I just always felt like I just never seemed to fit. And then I realized that a lot of assumptions were made about me, about the color of my skin, and what all of that was supposed to mean. And none of it ever applied to me. It was not me. But I got so much pushback for it that I actually started to conform so that I wouldn't be bullied. So in thinking about just understanding that I am a human being, so that's like the base level, that I'm a human being. And then looking at all the other attachments, yes, I have this body, I look like this, my ancestry is Africa, all of that. But what all that means, the meaning of it, I never was really interested in because I never felt it spoke to the truth of who I was. I'm not saying that it's not important for a lot of people. It's very meaningful for a lot of people, but for me, it never meant anything. And that wasn't a negative. It just sort of left me with this quandary about like, okay, who am I really? And what does that look like? So it was a process. It wasn't just sort of like a snap decision that, oh, I'm just going to drop everything. And it was a process, and it was an extremely painful process. Because I kept realizing I would change for people, I would become something that this person wanted me to be, and then they'd go away. And I'd be left with this persona that it didn't belong to me anyway. But I'm walking around as this thing, and then I meet another person, and then this persona I've created doesn't fit this person, so I have to change to be with this person. You know, people go insane from this stuff. It's not enough of a big conversation. People go crazy trying to just be accepted with dignity and compassion and caring and nurturing. You know, the human beings just beat each other up all the time, and I don't know why. So all I can say in response to your inquiry is that it was a process, and I don't really know how to track it because it's been going on for a really, really long time. But I just got to a point where none of this was working for me, period. And I said, I get to decide who I am. It might be this today, and it might be this tomorrow. I think the virtues are a good place to start. I am patience today. That's all I am, is patience. And then somebody cuts you off while you're driving. And you know, that goes all out the window, and it's like, oh, I'm supposed to be patient today, it's not working, you know, I'm not. It's really, I know this is very ambiguous, and you know, it's not linear, it's not literal, it doesn't make sense, but you know, I was saying to my other son earlier today, you know, if you talk to any physicist, they tell you that the universe is chaos. The universe is not a straight line. Galaxies are not necessarily a straight line. It's chaos all the time. And that's kind of the human condition. It's chaotic, but everybody's trying to line it up, like all their ducks are lined in a row and they know what's coming next and it's the big plan 5 years from now and all of that. That's not how life works because we're throwing curveballs all the time. So how are you going to adapt to whatever is put in front of you? And I think, honestly, we're just here to understand that we just need to know who we are. That's it. And that's tested all the time. So I'm this today, and then you get some crazy person that says something, and you know, you get angry, you check out. You know, I mean, it's just an ongoing sort of practice of, do you really want to be the truth, despite what else is, you know, other people are doing. So again, this isn't a linear process, so it's hard to answer these sort of questions. Because I don't know, and what works one day doesn't work another day. You know?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And
anybody else?
We have time for one more question. And then if not, there is refreshments down the cafe, and you can join Sharyll there for conversation.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.